Alex Radical from Board Game Co. and today we're talking about previews, reviews, what are they, what are the different opinions around them, what's the pros and cons, why would someone offer one versus the other, any and all of that and more. We'll have timestamps to everything down below so you can jump to whatever section catches your interest. This is not the first time I've had a conversation like this on the channel. I did a full conversation together with James Hudson a while ago. I'll try to link to that down below if I can find it. I did a full video with James Hudson talking about previews and reviews, pros and cons and all that. I did a different video as well once that's almost actually the impetus for this video to a certain extent, which is no one is lying about, no one is buying reviews, I think it was. I think it said no one is buying paid, or there are no paid reviews. I can't remember the exact title. That's part of why I'm doing this video right now, because the differing understanding around reviews and previews constantly lends itself to a conversation that is complicated. And I do touch upon that in No One is Buying Paid Reviews, although that is inherently more complicated because I talk about biases, I talk about other things, but paid reviews are infrequent at best. They semi-exist, but they're infrequent. Or maybe no one is buying positive reviews, maybe that was it. I don't remember exactly. I'll link to it down below. But that was recently shared, which was another reminder that this is a conversation that is unfortunately always worth having. It's always necessary to have this because there doesn't seem to be a clear understanding or consensus around this. There are from some people. Some people definitely understand and know the industry and know the space and know what they're looking at. But this space is always growing. There are always new people who are jumping into the board game space, and by extension, there are always new people who are finding the tabletop crowdfunding space, and by extension, there are always people who will be caught off guard by what types of content there are out there and the differences between those types of content. So this is a video you might see every 2 years on the channel, and whatever new spin I take it as to whatever new understandings we have around the changes in the industry, but this is going to be a constant conversation. Previews, reviews, what's the difference, pros and cons, and more, but I'm going to try to break it down fully for you. So I'm going to start off with what is a preview, and before we get to the force, let's start off with the basic. What types of board game content are there out there? Because there are a lot. There's reviews and previews, which we'll get into shortly. There's gameplays, there's how-to-plays, there's showcases, there's unboxings, there's top 10 lists, there's opinionated content around, general things around the industry. There are so many different types of content out there, which is amazing, by the way. It's amazing that no matter what you're interested in, there's some content creator or another who is delivering something that you're interested in, which is incredible. But this conversation is specifically around previews versus reviews. And the biggest problem you're going to start with is there are two differing opinions as to what is the distinction between a preview and a review. There's two differing camps that people fall into. I'm going to start with my definition of what I believe is the more commonly held opinion, which is the opinion that I hold and the terminology that I use. The tricky part is it is not universally held, which inherently introduces so much misunderstanding because there is a minuscule amount of people who have the alternative understanding and definition, and that confuses the waters. Not to say that they have to conform to the masses at all, just the understanding around the different opinions is part of already why it's going to be confusing. So let's start with opinion number one. Again, my opinion, and I believe the default held distinction between the two. A review is an opinionated piece around a board game. An opinionated piece. It is when you are going to offer an opinion with pros and cons, you're going to take a critical look. It doesn't mean you have to be critical, but it is a critical look, which means you are evaluating the merits of that game. And we're talking about the board game space right now, so I'm going to use the term game, but obviously it could apply to anything. But you're offering an informed opinion around that game with criticisms or lack of criticisms, depending on your own feelings around that game, but it is a review of that game. I'm going to try not to use the word review. It's an opinionated piece, pros and cons, if there are cons, if there are pros, around a game. That is the general opinion number one. And a preview is going to be more of a showcase around the game. It is not a reviewed opinion. It's not a here are the pros, here are the cons, here are the things I liked and didn't like. It is not meant to be offering a overall opinion of the person who's giving the presentation. Let's call it the presenter or whatnot. The presenter of a preview is not giving their own opinion around the game. Rather, they are talking about the game more with an understanding of you as the viewer. Like, this is what the game does. This is how it operates. It might even include some degree of semi-opinionated content. This might be for you if you like two-player head-to-head experiences. This might not work for you if you don't like multiplayer solitaire. They might have like a degree of trying to talk about your experience as the person who might play the game, but it's meant to be more of a guidebook to what that game is, as opposed to a critical opinion. So again, a review will be from someone who's giving their own opinion. I didn't like the drafting. I did like the area control. I didn't like the art, but I did think the graphic design was great. And a preview is, this is a 2 to 4 player experience. This is going to play in around an hour. It's going to give you an area control game. It's going to give you asymmetric factions. This might be the kind of game that you enjoy. If you find you enjoy other area control games, if you like powers and abilities, this may well be for you. That's more of a preview. So one is the person's opinion, and the other is, here's what this game is and whether it may or may not be right for you, not based off of my own opinion. I may have hated it. I may have loved it. Those things aren't entering the conversation. That's opinion number one as to what a review or a preview is. And it's only opinion number one. Opinion number two is going to add a different level to it. Opinion number two is that a review is when you are covering a game when it is in its final form. So when the game is produced, it is out, it exists, that is a review. And when the game does not exist yet, when it is a prototype, when it is not yet finalized, that is a preview. It doesn't matter whether the preview stage does have an opinion or not, it's a preview. You covered the game before it's gone through final production, before the final tweaks have been made. You're telling us whether you liked it or not. It doesn't matter, it is a preview. Oh, you're covering the game after it's finally out, and you're not really telling us whether it's for you or not, that is a review. So one terminology is around the type of content that is being produced around the game, and the other terminology is around when that game exists. Is it final or is it not? And I think both of those, I think the reasoning for either makes sense. I'm not here to challenge the reasoning. What I am here to challenge is I think that one of those terms is more commonly used, and that means that people who go against the more common definitions, to a certain extent, add to the confusion. It doesn't mean you have to conform. It does not. You have to live your best life. But it does mean that there is a difference in life between actual literal definition of something and the way that thing is used. Literal is actually a great example of this. Literally is literally used incorrectly all the time. And when I say all the time, I don't mean all the time, because that would be figuratively, or maybe figuratively, I don't know. But I'm literally going to, I don't know, whatever it is. Literally is a good example of where words can differ from their actual meaning, but common usage is ultimately going to carry more sway. And so that's kind of the definition of review versus preview. So the next time, before we even dive further into this video, because we're going to talk about why different types of content exist, we're going to talk about why content creators prefer one type of content, why the audience prefers content, why the publisher prefers the content. We're going to talk about those things. But the main thing to know is that the next time you are looking at a preview versus a review, it is worth trying to understand the differences between the two. What will further add to the confusion, which is the worst, is many crowdfunding campaigns will lump the two together, either calling both of them previews or calling both of them reviews. When a crowdfunding campaign goes ahead, and I think it's worse when they call it a review, when a crowdfunding campaign goes ahead and says, here are a bunch of reviews, and then posts a bunch of videos that are definitely not reviews, because very often they're not reviews by either definition. The game doesn't exist yet, so camp number 2 won't call it a review, and the video doesn't have an opinion, which means camp number 1 won't call it a review. So very often creators themselves are adding to the confusion, although sometimes to their own advantage. That's the tricky part. I'm not saying it's being done with the intent to deceive, but it is nice when you can call a fluffy video a review when it's definitely not a review by any measure at all that's being used. Because hey, someone watches that video, and this is the tricky part. When you're new to the industry, when you're new to the space, when you're new to crowdfunding, you can watch a 20-minute video on a game that sounds somewhat positive, and it might take you months or years before you look back and realize you never actually saw an opinion on the game. And that's hard. Because you're like, oh, this might be right for you if you like area control. You're like, I like area control. But that wasn't actually saying the game is good or they liked it. They're just saying, hey, if you like area control, this is an area control game. And that type of confusion is not good. On Board Game Co., on this channel, we primarily do reviews. But we definitely have previews as well. We have like 14 videos going up a week, and I'd say 2 to 3 of them are going to be sponsored content, and those are going to be previews or gameplays. And whenever one of my previews shows up, and I don't do the previews on the channel, if you ever see a preview, I think I've done one time, there's an exception. But in general, I don't do previews. Meg or Devin have done previews in the past, and generally it's something that I don't want to do myself, because I want that clear distinction. I want you as a viewer to know that when I'm doing the video, it is an opinion, and if somebody else is doing the video on their own, it may not be an opinion, it may be a preview. And I label them accordingly, but I want that clarity there. And when someone puts a Board Game Code preview and calls it a review, it grinds my gears, because I don't want to be adding to that deception, and I'm kind of being used to a certain extent. And again, I shouldn't say deception, I don't think it's necessarily intentionally done, I just think it's not great because it adds to the confusion. And then less damaging is when the previews, when the crowdfunding campaign says previews, and then puts reviews in there. That's less damaging because at least that adds to definition 2. At least definition 2 would include that all the content is preview content. Regardless of how the individual content creator labeled it themselves, at least it falls into a definition. Let's go to the next part of this video. Now that you're walking in at least more informed, informed does not mean you have to agree with either one, but at least it means you know that there are 2 different camps. Here are what the camps believe. Content creators will label the videos the way they believe it falls under, and do the best you can in this space. But when we move on to the next category, why would a content creator want to offer a review? Why would a content creator want to offer a preview? What are the driving forces between the types of content they offer? So let's start with review. Why would a content creator want to offer a review? And I'm going to go to the publishers next of why they would want one versus the other, but I think I have to start with the content creator for a reason, because their motivations will inherently inform the publisher, since the creator is the one that decides what type of content is offered, and that means the publisher's motivations are sometimes restricted to the types of content that is being offered, if that made sense. If it didn't make sense, it's honestly not that important. Why would a content creator want to offer a review? My first opinion, and this is all going to be opinionated throughout this entire video, obviously, is I believe review content, there's a higher level of interest from the audience, and a higher level of interest from the audience translates into more views and more attention, more actual individuality from the content creator. Because individuality is a big part of it too, because if you just have 7 channels offering a showcase of a game, just telling you, well, this is a 2 to 4 player area control game, and you might like it if you like area control games. That's not a lot of room to stand out as a creator. You can. There's ways you can do so with incredible production, incredible B-roll, whatever it is. Like, there's things you can do to still stand out. But effectively, the content you're now offering will come down to the clarity to which you can cover the game and the production level that you are offering. That's the way you're going to stand out at that point. But your own individuality as an opinion, your own individuality as your critical view that comes to the table isn't going to be present. So, first of all, it's hard to stand out in a crowd. And second of all, is the reason an individual might want to watch multiple videos from multiple channels is to get a disparity of opinions. That's often going to be a motivating factor, but then also they just want opinions. We're talking about people, we're talking about the audience who is being asked to shell out anywhere from $20 to hundreds of dollars for a crowdfunding game that doesn't exist yet. They might actually want opinions and not just showcases, so they can get some sense of, did this channel or that person who I trust, or that person whose taste I align with, did they like the game? Versus if they just talk about the game, if they don't tell you what they like, it still can be helpful. It still is. You still get to walk away knowing more information, but it's different than actionable. Well, it is actionable, but it's a different level than an opinion. So I think that more interest in the audience translates into better views, translates into a content creator wanting to offer a review. The second reason would be personal preferences for the types of content they want to offer. I don't like talking about games without giving an opinion. On a personal level, again, Board Game Co. as a channel, we do offer preview content. But I myself hate it. If I am ever in any content, sponsored or otherwise, again, even if I do a gameplay at least I'm playing the game. But if you ask me what my thoughts are on the game, I will tell you. And whether or not it loses me business down the road, I don't care. I just care too much about the hobby personally. And it's not a judgment on other creators. My own personal interest level in the hobby is that I don't like the idea that I'm going to play a game, and then if you ask me, well, did you like that game, Alex? I'm going to be like, talk to me in 3 months or 6 months or a year. I don't want to do that. Now, so in a sponsored gameplay that I might be present in, because I am present in sponsored gameplays, I won't sit there in the video itself saying what I think about the game that much, unless it comes up. If it comes up, sure. But in any sort of commentary of any kind, I will tell you what I thought of the game. I'll be like, yeah, of course I was involved in the sponsored gameplay. That game wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. Now, if I believe a game is bad, I won't even take it on. There's a difference between believing a game is bad versus not for me. But if a game is bad, I just won't take it on in general. Versus if a game doesn't feel like it's for me, but I can see who the audience is, I'll just tell you that it's not for me. I don't mind that. But that does mean, though, that preview content, which is going to be more focused on being unopinionated in general, not across the board necessarily, it does mean that I don't want to offer I don't want to offer content that doesn't have an opinion, that is just talking about, like, here's a showcase of the game. It's just not for me. It's not what I get value out of. And so that's a personal opinion around why I don't want to offer preview content, and I do want to offer review content. As far as why would a content creator offer preview content, there's a few more reasons. First of all, is content creators have to pay the bills in general, and more often than not, when it comes to payment, there is payment and sponsored content around preview content. There is less frequently sponsored content around review content. Now, there is, to be clear, there are a few channels out there that offer opinions on the games while being paid, while being sponsored for those videos. It's not something I personally want to do, but again, I think every channel, I want to be very clear about it. Whenever I talk about other content creators or the field in general, I always want to be very clear about how I view things or say things. I believe that I, as a channel, will do things like, for example, review copies. Board Game Co. does take review copies, and I would say a majority of the games we cover on the channel are review copies. And I know there are some channels that have the stance they won't even take a review copy. And so, to me, it's not about right and wrong, it's about your own individual level of what you want to do in the hobby. For me, personally, I'm comfortable taking review copies. I'm not comfortable taking a check while giving an opinion. And that's my own personal level. It's not a level I'm trying to apply to anyone else, it's my own personal level. And so, and I do think most channels do not give an opinion while being sponsored. Most. There are some, and every channel has to do what's work for them. Every channel has to do what's right for them, and every audience member has to decide what content works for them. Across the board, regardless of what you're watching. But so the first thing is, if you are someone who does subscribe to the idea that you don't take a check for opinionated content, which is usually, I think, held by most people, but not by everyone, that means that sometimes doing preview content does allow you to take a check to do a showcase of the game, to not muddy the waters with payment and opinions, but it allows you to do sponsored content in a way that helps pays the bills of the channel. It also, which is a semi the same thing, but also a little different, it opens the door for you to be able to justify higher quality content. So it's not just about paying the bills, but justifying your time for what you're doing. In some cases, you might want to do, like, if you follow Tim Chun, for example. Tim Chun does amazing content. Absolutely amazing. Some of the best quality content in the board game space that I can't imagine how he could ever justify the time that goes into it if it wasn't sponsored. And so not all of his content is sponsored, but a lot of his content will be sponsored because it allows him to actually spend the time on making literal board game art. An incredible channel with incredible production values, an incredible guy. But in general, that certain times, certain types of content, you can't justify the time that goes into it unless that content is sponsored. So it opens the doors to, again, content variety or not. The preferences to avoid opinionated content is another factor. This goes back to the similar point where I covered reviews, the content creator's own personal preferences. In my case, it's a refusal to ever not be willing to offer an opinion. I always wanted to give my opinion about anything that happens, board games or otherwise. But in the case of many creators, some creators don't like giving opinions around board games because, frankly, if you give opinions around board games, especially if you're willing to be critical, that can also muddy the waters. And some people just don't like... Muddy the waters is the wrong terminology, that's too loose, doesn't really define things. Some people don't like being negative. And to that end, a preview video is safer than a video that gives a critical opinion of a game. A video that's willing to be negative, whether that's because you just don't like being negative in the space, whether it's because you like sharing the love for the hobby and not, the things that didn't make you happy, whether it's because you don't feel that you want to play games you don't enjoy and you don't want to review games you only played once and you're never willing to give a second play, or whether it's because you don't want to step on toes in the relationships in the industry. This is a very friendly industry, and I would argue that relationships and the bias that exists because of relationships, I would argue is 100% present. I think for most people, it's literally about the relationship and not about feeling cut off from a board game. I've never once hesitated to give a negative opinion because I was worried about being cut off from a board, from getting free games from a publisher. But I've absolutely felt the cringe of, I know this person and I have to see them and I just gave their game a 2 out of 5. I've had that cringe. Games itself, and I think everyone's going to be different, everyone's going to have their own lines. Bias certainly exists, make no mistake. I'm not trying to pretend that bias doesn't exist, and because bias exists, you might have creators who don't want to give opinionated content for bias or for other reasons. And then lastly, is a disagreement that a non-final product should be reviewed. You may have a creator who is perfectly fine reviewing a final retail game, but they don't feel they should or could review a game that's in progress, a game that is a prototype. It's not yet finished. Things are still being cleaned up. How could I review this? How can I put an opinion out there on the internet for the world to see when this game isn't finished? And I think it's a valid stance. If you watch that video I linked to earlier, if you watch the video between myself and James Hudson, we really go into that kind of detail because I think it's an incredibly valid opinion, My own personal opinion is the time when people are being asked to pay money is now, so the time when people want an opinion is now. But the idea that you're reviewing an unfinished product, that's absolutely true. So it should come with the qualifications that it's an unfinished product, but I'm still willing to review it. But I respect those who aren't. And so that's why a content creator might offer preview content. Why would a board game publisher want one versus the other? So let's start with review content. The first aspect is they might want opinionated content and feedback. Feedback around their game, feedback that they can go ahead and incorporate, understanding what the space in general wants, or giving opinionated content. The second reason would be that building that potential backer or buyer confidence with a review. Reviews are a two-edged sword. They potentially come with negative things that will push people away from backing or buying the game, but they also come with the fact that a positive review can encourage people to back or buy the game. It gives people confidence in the product, in the game being created, and so review content can have a merit because of that. There's often higher views on review content because of what I mentioned already. There's higher audience interest in review content, so generally a video review will get more views than a video preview in general. Not across the board, channel size are factors and all those things, but in general I think that's true. There's more reasons for backers to watch multiple videos on that content. This again goes back to what I said, where if you have 7 different previews, how many previews of a game do you really need to see? But if you have 7 different reviews, you might not watch all 7, but I can bet you're going to watch more reviews than previews if the options existed. And so again, giving a game to a creator and encouraging and having them do a review might incentivize more views across the game and more potential backers or buyers. And then lastly, because of what I mentioned already about sponsored content, review content is more likely to be free. Now, to be clear, by the way, preview content can also be free. There's absolutely free, non-sponsored preview content. But if you are looking for review content is more likely to be free across the spectrum because more creators don't charge for opinions. They might charge for a preview, but not for a review. Again, on Board Game Go, when we talk to creators, very often the way we handle things over here is that reviews are not always on the table. If I'm going to review a game, I'm going to play it multiple times, and it's also free. There's no money involved, so I have to really be interested on a personal level. But previews, because there's a check attached, because someone else on the team is doing it, there's sometimes more flexibility. And so sometimes, people often want the review, but it's not always available just based on my own time and availability, versus previews can be more available in that sense. But a creator might want a review because it's free. As far as why would a publisher want a preview as opposed to a review, first of all, that I talked about this already, but the fact that they might believe that a non-finished product shouldn't be reviewed. They might sit there and say, how could I give my game out there to the world and have people review it when it's not finished yet? We're still tweaking things. We're still adjusting for balance. We're still changing. The player count's still a question. We don't even know. It's a campaign game where you get the first mission. How could you review this product? How could you? So there might be a disagreement from the creator side that you can't review my game, so I'm not going to give it to you for review. I will only give it for preview. The other side of things, there might be a fear around opinionated content in general. Even if you're not against it from how could you might just sit there and say, hey, reviews might hurt the campaign. Reviews might encourage people to walk away if the review isn't positive. If you're not confident in the product enough, and to be clear, you could be confident your game is good, but not be confident somebody else will have a good experience playing it. But if that overall lack of confidence pervades this game, or how many people are given access to it, especially if you only have a few copies. If you have 15 copies to review, that one person doesn't enjoy it, it is what it is, who cares? If you have 3 copies to give out to review, which is more common amongst prototypes, if you only have a handful of copies, a single negative review can have a much larger detrimental impact than if you have 15 going around. So that's another reason why you might be mindful of review content and want a preview content. And then lastly, more availability from busy content creators. As much as the review content might be free, if you are targeting larger content creators who generally have a backlog of things to go through, you are more likely to be able to sign up for them with a preview than a review. That access there, if they offer both or whatnot, if they offer different types of content, that access might be present, even though it might come with a price tag. It at least comes with the ability to get in the door, whereas you might otherwise not. Again, full transparency on Board Game Co. There's many times where we sit there and say we won't review this, but preview work is an option, and that's once I'm not interested enough. Like there's a line: if a game looks bad, I don't cover it at all. If a game looks really good, I want to cover it. And if a game falls in the middle and I'm too backlogged, I'm like, okay, it looks good enough, but I just don't have the bandwidth to cover it. But you could sign up for our preview content, so that's another kind of option on the table, another reason there. Which brings to the last conversation. Are reviews paid for? Are previews paid for? I kind of touched upon this already, but I still want to get into it. Let's start with reviews. Reviews are very rarely paid for. meaning opinionated content is very rarely paid for. I say very rarely because there are exceptions. There are some creators who will offer opinionated content while being sponsored in that. And I understand why they will do so. There are some, by the way, who do so while being negative, meaning some creators are willing to take a check for covering a game, and they give opinionated content, and they're even willing to be negative. And at least respect to them in that sense for the fact that they are willing to tarnish a relationship, and they took a check, and they're still willing to dump on the game, so at least respect in that sense. There are others who will take a check to only offer positive content, a positive opinionated content around the game. Again, I want to be mindful. Like I said, I like giving my opinion. I do like giving my opinion, but I also want to be mindful and respectful to people in the space. I personally am not a fan of taking a check for opinionated content, regardless of whether you're willing to be negative or not. But I also think that I do things, again, accepting review copies, one example, or going on publisher trips. I will go on publisher trips, for whatever the launch of a next game is. I do that, and I understand anyone who is critical of that. I completely understand. So for me, it's about everyone's going to have their own line in the sand of how they operate in line with their own value system, and I am going to try to not judge others the same way I would prefer to not be judged. It's just trying to do what's right for you, and your audience members have to do what's right for them. And that applies to other channels and my channel. But when it comes to review content, whether it's paid for, most of the time the answer is no. And what muddies the waters further, and this again goes to the complexity of anything, is even a tag that says this is a sponsored video is hard to say whether the video is sponsored, because there is a push from some people that if you get a review copy, you should tag the video as sponsored. There is some people believe that is the way it should be done. And the vast majority don't, but because some people do, you never really know exactly what's going on in that sense, which is just complicated. And again, this one's not an area of judgment at all. It's just an area of the complexities of trying to manage there's a huge difference between getting a review copy for a game and then getting a $500 check to cover the game. There's a huge miles away difference. They can't all be covered with that little tag over there. On Board Game Co, we tag it as sponsored content if it's sponsored. If it's a review copy, we do not tag it as sponsored content. But so most reviews are not paid for. There are some that are. With previews, I would say it's more of a mixed bag. Preview content for a game, I would argue most are paid for, but I think that difference is not as high. I think a lot of preview content is paid for, and there's a decent amount that's not paid for. And again, know your creator, know who you're watching, know what the relevant information is. I think the information is less important when it's a preview. When there's a review, I think it's up to the audience member to know, is that bias present or not? You can decide, do you trust this creator or not? You can make that decision. That's fine. I'm not saying you can't trust the creator. I'm saying with money changed hands and I'm giving an opinion around the game, the audience should for sure know that. If I'm just giving a showcase of the game, while I think it's useful to know, I still think it's good to know, I think it's less important personally. You may disagree or not, I don't know. But that's kind of, are they paid for or not? The most important thing at the end of the day is awareness. Awareness of what a preview is. Awareness of what a review is. Awareness of when they are being given. Awareness of whether money changed hands. The most important thing, in my opinion, is knowing the content you're consuming. Knowing the potential biases at play. And this is one of those complicated things where I try to give biases. I've gotten in trouble for both. I've gotten in trouble for giving not enough biases at times, and I've gotten in trouble for giving too many biases. And trouble's a relative term. I've had people complaining that I've given too many biases. Like, dear Lord, just make the video. Stop telling us all these conflicts of interest and whatnot. But I've also had people who are like, no, we want to know the conflicts of interest. And it's hard. It's a hard balance to master no matter what. But for sure, if money is changing hands, that should absolutely be broadcast loud and clear. If I ever go on a content creator trip, I believe that taints the waters too. And I will broadcast that loud and clear. How far down the rabbit hole of disclaimers you choose to go, that is complicated. Do the best you possibly can as a creator, and try to have the best understanding you can as an audience member, but it certainly gets more and more complicated. I did a full video once of going through what level of biases people want to see disclaimed, because it does get so complicated so quickly, and it's not clear. There's no clear consensus across the board as to what makes the most sense. There are differing opinions. Ultimately, as much awareness as possible is key, which is why I made this video. That's basically it. We'll see you again in 2 years with another conversation around previews and reviews and all the things that have changed in the space since then. But until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.